hour is coming when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Amen.
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 Thank you, Beatrice, for reading that epic story from the Gospel of John, the longest conversation Jesus has in any of the Gospels. It's such a rich and fascinating episode. But before we get to it, let's take a look at the reading from Romans. 4 out of the 5 Sundays in Lent this year, we hear from this letter, Paul's masterpiece, written from Corinth to the followers of Jesus in Rome, who Paul was hoping to visit on his way to Spain in about the year 58. This is an important letter because Paul explains in a carefully developed argument how God's intervention in the world in the death and resurrection of Christ has drawn us into unity and given us freedom. We have been justified, declared righteous in the sight of God, so that we are now at peace with God. And this is important because life is still life. We are still subject to the struggles and problems of a world that has not embraced the redemption of Christ. And we are still human. We still face the end of our mortal life as a constant reality. But it's okay, Paul tells the Romans, because suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us. When we're under pressure, Christians react with patience, which builds and proves our trust and leads us to full confidence in who God is. And God's grace is so powerful that even when bad things happen, especially when bad things happen, our faith grows because God never leaves us alone. Hope does not disappoint us, Paul writes. We all know that our faith gets tested, and sometimes we can't understand the things that happen. To accompany the story of the woman at the well, we have the story of the ancient Hebrews in the wilderness who, like the Samaritan woman, need water. Their faith is being tested by their time in the desert after they've been freed from slavery, and they don't respond very well. In fact, Moses tells God that they're about ready to kill him because they're so thirsty, and because they don't trust God. Their suffering is not producing endurance or character or hope. It's producing rage. God provides them with water from a rock, a miracle that may have quelled their anger but may not have built their faith. Something more was going to be required to create the trust and the peace that Paul describes in the letter. The woman at the well has also suffered. She's at the well in the middle of the day's heat alone, instead of early in the morning with the other women, possibly because she's living a life of shame. We don't know why she's had 5 husbands. It's certainly possible that she's been widowed 5 times. Life expectancy in those days was very short. But her life clearly has been a struggle. And she's a Samaritan. The Samaritans were people who lived in what had originally been the northern part of the kingdom in David's time. But after they'd been conquered by the Assyrians, they intermarried with them and became essentially a different ethnic group, hated by the Jews of Judea, the southern kingdom. So when Jesus meets her and asks her for a drink, she's stunned. How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? This is so far outside of what was acceptable, she can't even believe it. Listen again to how Jesus responds, because he is, in his own way, telling her what Paul said to the Romans. If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. He's telling her that the grace of God is real. Even with all that she has faced, all of her suffering, her sins, perhaps her shame, maybe, despite all of it, God offers her the free gift of grace if she will only have faith. I know the Messiah is coming, she says to Jesus. She does have a glimmer of faith and hope. I am he, the one who is speaking to you, Jesus replies. I am he. This is such a beautiful story because we get to watch in real time as the truth of God's grace sinks in. And this woman, as unlikely a recipient of God's mercy as anyone around Jesus might have imagined at the time, she becomes a model of faith. She becomes an evangelist and even goes off to tell others what she has just begun to understand and believe. She does, in the presence of Christ, what Paul is trying to encourage the Romans to do 20 years later from afar. Turn to God and accept with joy the grace that God offers. We all suffer. We've all gone to the well, trying to get enough water to meet our needs, whatever they might be. You may have had times of being angry at God because things were not how you wanted them to be. I know I have. And yet somehow God proves himself to us. From our suffering, we gain patience. We develop character. We remember to hope, because in the end, God always keeps us safe. Even when our time comes, as we face our mortality, even then we have faith that we are safe in the care of a loving God. We have peace, Paul tells the Romans. We have peace. The word he uses for peace in Greek is eirene, which means calm, quietness, rest. When we grow in faith, when we accept the gift of grace, we don't have to worry so much anymore. We aren't angry like the Hebrews in the desert or lost like the Samaritan woman at the well. We are reconciled to God, and we truly know his peace. John tells us that when the disciples came back, they were astonished that Jesus was speaking to a woman. They were probably horrified that he was speaking to a Samaritan woman who surely could not be included among the elect. Here's what I take from what Jesus does here. Even I can be reconciled to God. Even I, in my brokenness and lack of faith and sometimes frustration and lack of patience and character, even I can. Jesus goes to the most unlikely person he can find and says to her and to the disciples and to us, you are loved. You are accepted. You are free. So now why don't you go and start living that way?